I want to emphasize some more the moment-by-moment aspect of taking up the cross and denying myself. And one of the things that Marshall was mentioning to me, that this little door right here could easily be described as the veil in the temple, because we go back again and see that God works in patterns, and there was the Holy of Holies, and then the holy place, and then the outer court, and of course this is the place where God Himself dwelt. The holy place, and that's our spirit where He dwells in us. The holy place is our soul, the outer court is our body. And this veil represented the infinite nearness of God, and yet the infinite distance, because you couldn't get to Him with the veil there. And it's really nice to remember the infinite nearness of Christ. He is as close as the words in your mouth. And yet He's infinitely distant if you want to experience His life with this veil closed or this door closed. And so the cross for us is a moment-by-moment experience. I equate it to marriage. I'm married once, and yet all of us that are married know that it's daily, don't we? I remember seeing a girl and doing some pre-marriage counseling, and she got married and came back later and told me she just didn't like it. I just don't like marriage. I said, well, what is it about you don't like? She goes, I don't know, I just don't like it. I just don't like being married. And I said, well, that's not good enough to say I just don't like being married. What is it about marriage you don't like? And I kept pressing her, and finally she says, well, what I don't like about it is it's so daily. And I said, well, it is daily. So I'm married once, but I know that I'm married daily. Now, right now, I'm not experiencing marriage because someone's missing in this room. Who's missing? If I want to experience marriage, where do I need to go? Well, I've got to go back to Betty. And so I'm crucified once with Christ, but it becomes a daily thing. And if I'm not experiencing the freedom from that old life that is dead, the Adam life, and I'm focused on it, and I'm not experiencing the freedom of my humanity and living out of my soulishness and my human powers, and the freedom from my body, and the freedom from everything else that Christ gained freedom over, then I need to go back to the cross. Now, when Jesus said to the disciples, take up the cross and deny me, or take up the cross and deny yourself, in Luke 9:23, they understood exactly what He was saying. The Romans made you, a criminal, carry your own cross. And you had to carry the cross through the city. And as you carried the cross through the city and other people looked at you, you were acknowledging that you deserved the sentence that they gave you. That this was a just and a righteous thing. Now, it would have been interesting on that day to see Christ go through the city, because what happened is, before He got to the city, they took the cross from Him, and He's standing here, and they gave it to a man, and he carried it with the crowd behind him. If you were looking out your window, you would have looked at that and said, now that's interesting, because there's a whole crowd acknowledging that they ought to die today, that they deserve the judgment of the cross. God didn't have Him carry the cross through the city because it was an unjust death and He didn't deserve it. But we take up the cross daily and deny ourselves because we've defined what self is, and that thing should be denied and isn't worthy to being carried around. But we don't believe that we really ought to die. And only one man got it on that day, and it wasn't one of the 12, and it wasn't one of the 3, and it wasn't the disciple that He loved, and it wasn't his mother. Because on that day, everyone's yelling out to him, you saved others, why don't you save yourself? And then they're thinking this, that he ought to die so we can live. It's better that he dies that we all live and that things aren't stirred up. But there was one man that saw things differently, and that was the thief on the cross. And he was the only one that made the statement. And he said this, do you know what? I really ought to die, but you ought to live. And the reward for him was, this day you'll be with me in paradise. Do you know, if you want to experience paradise every day, you say the same thing the thief said? That today, Jesus, you're the one that ought to live, and this is the one that ought to die. And then we experience paradise, and that is the principle of the cross. That the only way I give life is to accept the fact that I have to die, and out of my innermost being will flow a river of living water. Well, how does that work out in just the practical experiences of everyday life? So I use the example that I go home and I step in the house and I say, Betty, I'm home. And her response to me is, you got dirt all over the rug when you were here over lunch. Where did you drag in that oil? And she's upset. Now, as soon as she does that and she speaks to me like that, this door closes. I go out to the garden, running out there, and I dig up the old man that's dead, the Adam life. And I give him mouth to mouth to see if he'll come back. And these old feelings begin to get stirred, the baggage of that old life, because now it's my focus. And who does she think she is talking to me that way? This door is now closed. I move into my humanness, and in my mind, will, and emotions and body, I've got to handle this whole situation. So you've rejected me, I'm going to reject you back. And I say this to Betty, well, why does that little bit of oil on the rug bother you when the rest of your house is a pig pen? That ought to get her going. And of course, then the door closes here for her. She runs to the garden, gets her old life out. How dare I talk to it that way? Then in her mind, will, and emotion, she's got to sort out what to do next in her humanness and her distortion. And the next thing you know, we're in a marriage spiral where we're biting at each other, withdrawing, and everything's a mess. Now, here's the other option. Because I'm beginning to understand what my self-life is, I walk in the house, and she says to me, look at how you got oil on the rug, you've messed the whole thing up. And I begin to feel worthless and unloved and rejected, and I know that that is a symptom of shutting myself off from Christ. And I allow that to be a flashing red light in me that's a warning that says, don't go any farther. I'm letting the peace of God rule in my heart. And the peace of God's leaving me, and I know that. And so now I have a choice to make. And what is it that I have to do for myself that God won't do for me? What is it that only I can do? And that's to make a choice. And I've got to make a choice then at that point to open this door, to make Him my focus, to say, no, I've been crucified with Christ, to say, no, this is not a day for humanity, this is a day for divinity. You come and be my life. And I take up the cross, and I take 2 steps forward, and I give her a hug and a kiss, and she turns her cheek away from me and stomps into the kitchen. What do I do then? I got to grab the cross a little harder, and I walk into the kitchen. Well, how was your day? Fine. I got to grab the cross a little harder. Then I go in and I clean the rug up. I got to grab it even harder yet. And then I go in and start talking to her, and she doesn't want to talk at first. Then she opens up. Then we start sharing. Then I give her another kiss. And all of a sudden, we're moving out of our spiral, out of our spiral, out of our spiral. And finally, it all ends that night. Well, that's not any of your business, is it? How it all ends. But it ends differently because I took up the cross and I denied myself. That's a practical application of that. I've got a friend of mine who has done nearly everything anybody could do. And he's an incredible outdoorsman, and the situations that he's been in, and the things that he's conquered, and the stuff that he's overcome. You could listen to him for hours. He's had an amazing, amazing life. And there's not enough A's and bad to describe this guy. He is just bad. And the funny thing about him, he just carries that air about him that people are just frightened of him, and yet he's a believer. But he just has one of those guys, you see the signs that you laugh at that say no fear, but he really has a sign over his head that says no fear. And he came to my office one day. He was steamed. He just stopped by the office. He came in. He stomped in front of the desk, and he sat down and he said, I just want to tell you that I've left my wife. And I am sick of the woman. I mean, I am sick of her. And he said, I don't want you to open your mouth or say anything. He said, you're the man of a silver tongue. He said, I should have left her 15 years ago when I was in here talking to you. He said, I've been married to her for 25 years. I could have killed her and been out of prison by now. I'm that sick of the woman. And I'm just telling you that I've left and I'm gone and I'm not going back. And I don't know what she's doing. She was in a heap. I don't care what happens to her. You might want to call her. You can talk to the kids if you want to. But I ain't going back. And I looked at him and I said, do you know the interesting thing about you is you're such a puss. And he goes, what? I said, you're a weenie. And he stood up and he stood on my desk. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, you're a puss. You're a weenie. You're a wimp. I don't know how else to say it. And he walked around my desk and the guy just towers over me. And he says, Mike, you know I like you, but you have a habit of pushing things too far. What do you mean? And I said, brother, the test of a man is not in all the things that you've told me that you've done in your life. And I said, I am amazed by everything you've done. But the test of a man is taking up the cross, denying yourself, and walking across the room and hugging and kissing your wife when she's made you this mad and offended you. And in all these 25 years, you've never met that challenge. You've never done it. Well, I'll tell you a secret. You can't do it. All you can do at that moment, your choice isn't to walk over and love her. Your choice is Jesus and choose Him. Get your eyes on Him and let His life flow. And you can go do it and it'll be supernatural. But I said, that's the test of a man. And I'm telling you this. I haven't done 1/10 of what you've done, but I'm 10 times the man you are. Because I've done that. And until you do that, you're always going to be a wimp and a puss and a weenie to me. That's just the way it is. Well, he turned around and he stomped out. She called later in the week, made an appointment to come in the next week. They come in together and she's just beaming. And I said, what's going on with you? And she said, well, I just have to tell you what happened. It's the most amazing thing. She said, I came home from my job. I was having PMS, had a migraine. I thought my head was going to blow apart. I stepped in the door, and my husband's in there wrestling with the kids, throwing potato chips at each other. And the stuff is flying everywhere, and the whole house is a mess, and there's nothing but screaming. And she said, I'm starving. And I'd left dinner there, and all they had to do was put it in the oven. And I noticed the oven light isn't on. And she said, I just completely lost it and stood there in the middle of the room cursing and screaming. And I said, well, what are you so happy about? And she started weeping and said, my husband usually when that happens just stomps out the door, says goodbye, and is gone for 3 or 4 days. But what he did this time is he walked over to me and he put his arms around me and he held me close and he gave me a kiss and said, it'll be okay. You go lay down and I'm going to bring you some aspirin and we'll run out and we'll get something to eat and the kids will get the house cleaned up while you're laying down. And she said he held me and took me into the bedroom and laid me down on the bed and said, I'll be back. And she's weeping while she's telling me this. And I looked over at him, and here's this big guy who's climbed every mountain. And I said, brother, how hard was that to do? And he goes, ooh, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I said, but how did you feel? And he said, I have never, ever felt that free. Taking up and denying yourself, taking up the cross and denying yourself is the most freeing thing there is. Because as long as another person's words or behavior can control your words and behavior, you're not spirit-ruled, you're other-ruled. And we spend the majority of our life in a place of just being other-ruled. Now, this doesn't come quickly, the practice of this, of taking up the cross and denying self, of understanding what my self-life is. It's a process that takes years. But if I'll lose my life, I'll be able to give life continually to other people. Look at 2 Corinthians 4. And this is what Paul says there. (10 through 12). Through suffering, these bodies of ours constantly share in the death of Jesus. So we're saying that the cross is a daily experience, and that I'm going to share in His death daily. And it feels like death, and all of you that have experienced know what I mean, that to take up the cross and go ahead and deny digging that thing up and deny living in my humanism and to deny living out of my body and my resources is death. So we're constantly sharing the death of Jesus, but here's why. So that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies, that it can be seen there. Yes, we live under constant danger of death because we serve Jesus, so that the life of Jesus will be obvious in our dying bodies. So we live in the face of death, but it has resulted in life for you. So it's death in me, but it's life in you. It takes place moment by moment. You know, they discovered something about the bighorn sheep in the Rocky Mountains, that in the spring when those sheep are fighting, you can hear them in the high country, and you guys have heard them, you've been up there, you'll hear them butting heads. But here's what they discovered that was very, very interesting. That when the males are fighting for dominance in the spring, they'll often meet on these little edges or the cliff walls. And when they meet, the young male wants to fight. But the dominant one, who's strongest and oldest, instead of fighting there, will actually lay down, and they have footage of it, laying down and letting the younger male walk over his back to go on. The old male won't fight him at a place where he could fall to his death. And so what he does instead is he picks the ground where he wants to fight, and he lays down. And he'll fight on another day in the high country where he'll win. That's why he's dominant. But you know, we have to be like that goat. As we meet people in the world, we take up the cross, we deny ourselves, and we let them walk over us. We'll fight the battle at a higher place, in a high country. And so here's what this moment by moment thing is going to look like. Christ is in me, and I'm in Christ, and I'm in the very center of the universe. I'm in the center of eternity. And when I'm in Him and He's in me, then all the victories that He won are my victories, and I'm living a life of joy, His joy, and a life of victory, and a life of from and not for. But if I let situations move me out of here, I'll move to the fringe and go out to the edge, and I lose my power, just as we were talking about. We have the kingdom, we have heaven here, and we have earth here, and they both crossed over in a place called Christ, and that's called heaven on earth, the kingdom of God. And when I'm abiding and dwelling in Him, then all of His power of heaven is mine on earth, and I'm more than a conqueror. If I move out of that, I move back into the earth, and I live there in the power of an earthly person. And so when I move out to the edge here, I'm on the fringe, my eyes are on me, my eyes are on self. I get out the old tools, the old coping mechanisms. I try to walk like Jesus. I try to fix relationships. I try to help. I try to find enjoyment. I try to minister. I try to free myself from habits and idols. I'm living out here, a fringe Christian. And finally, I get so disgusted with the defeat that I say, I can't fix myself, I can't fix others. I take up the cross daily again, and now I acknowledge He can, that it's got to be His power. He creates, that He does all the work, and I allow that to drive me back into His presence. And there I find the victory again, which is in Him. One of the fellows in India that disciples me, many of you know him, Alex Matthew. He's got a great testimony. And as you know him, he's just a very, very soft person. My mother always called him her little Indian angel. And he is like an angel. And he's got so much compassion. I think Alex's real ministry is just in just being around him. But Alex wanted more than anything else to be a physician. He studied hard in school. He passed all the tests. And I believe went to Delhi or Hyderabad for the day of admissions to sign up for the medical school. He got there and got food poisoning and was stuck in his room and couldn't go. And so he took his application and he paid a boy and sent him to take it to the medical school so they would know that he was there and that he'd arrived for school. And the boy just took the money and went off and never did take the application. So when he got well, he got there and they'd filled the position. He couldn't be a doctor. And they said the only thing that we have open is botany. So he had to become a botanist. He didn't want to become a botanist, but he did. He spent 17 years in Tanzania as a botanist and made some interesting discoveries. One discovery he made, which was a huge one, is he found that wherever a certain plant was, that if you dug down between 20 and 40 feet, you would always find water. And it was a great discovery because people, they walked for miles there to get their water, and they were walking past these plants. And the way he discovered it is that a certain ant will only live where there's water, and an ant loves that particular seed. So it would take the seed there, and of course there was always water there. So he'd done a lot of things in botany. He was a communist from South India, and he was a very, very angry fellow. And as a university professor in South India, he would take the students out, and what they would look for is there's a plant that evolutionists really like because they say that it's a link between a plant and an animal. And this thing lives on the sides of cliffs close to waterfalls. So he had a whole group of students out one day, and they're looking for this plant that lives on the side of the rocks and the waterfalls. And he said that the water was rushing so quickly, and some of the boys found one and they wanted to get out into the water to get it. He had them all lock arms and try to get a boy out there, but the rocks were so slippery and the water so fast that it'd just wash everybody away and they'd have to pull them in. Well, he sent them on downstream to look for other things, and he said he was just sitting there and looking at the water, and there was a Hindu priest sitting underneath a tree. And this man was blind. And he said he was just looking at the Hindu priest, and the priest got up, and all he was wearing was a loincloth, and he had a stick, and he was feeble, and he was blind. And he came to the edge of the water, and Alex thought he was going to get a drink, but instead what he did is he walked right straight out into the water, and it never washed him away. And he went straight out into the water, and he took a bath, and he came straight back. The water never did bother him, and here's all these strong boys washed away. And he went and he sat down. And Alex went over to the blind man, and he said, "How did you do that? I had those young men that are strong try to get out into the water, and they couldn't." And he said, "You walked into the middle of the river, and you came back." And the Hindu priest said, "It's because of my stick. I let my stick guide me. And did you notice that my stick went ahead of me? And if I found a place that wasn't slippery, and I found a place that was solid, my stick told me, and I put my foot there, and then I knew the next place that my stick told me would be good. And so my stick took me out, and my stick brought me back." And Alex said, "Okay, I understand." And he started to walk away, and the old Hindu called him back. And he came back, and the Hindu said, "There's something I have to tell you. You don't have a stick, do you?" And Alex said, "No, I don't have a stick. I don't have one with me." The Hindu man said, No, I don't mean a physical stick. You don't have a spiritual stick. You've got nothing to show you where to put your foot, do you? You've got nothing to guide you, do you?" And Alex said to the man, he had to admit, "I don't." All he had was anger and communism. And he said he walked away so depressed because he didn't have a stick. And he went to his office, and he said he was so undone, And he'd never been that low, and to be confronted that much with not having a stick. And here's a man who'd been cheated out of medical school, who wanted to be a doctor, who was forced into botany. And he looked on his bookshelf and he just said, what do I do for a stick? And in all these books, a Bible caught his eye that someone had given him. He grabbed the Bible and he threw it down on the table and said, maybe this is my stick. And when he threw it open, this botanist threw it open to John 15, and his eyes fell on this. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do bear fruit so that they will produce even more. You've already been pruned for greater fruitfulness by the message I've given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you, for a branch cannot produce fruit of itself apart from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful apart from me. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. And his mind began to flood over what a vine and a branch was. And he began to think of all of those things. As you put a branch in a vine, the branch is dying, and it takes all of its energy and all of its life, and it sends out these little fingers, and it tries to get a hold of the vine. And the only reason grafting works is that pathetic attempt to get a hold of the vine is rewarded with a power 1,000 times greater that takes hold of the branch and holds it in. And then the vine dresser itself comes and holds it so it won't go anywhere. And he thought to himself, I found my stick. That's where I'll be led and guided. And at that point, he believed in Christ. He was grafted in, and he's been held there ever since, remaining in him. Okay, let's take another break.